Hi, everybody. This is Jay Halfond. It's a pleasure to welcome you again to Conversations with Experts. It's June 2020, which might provide some context to our conversation with Geraldine Muir today. Jerry is the Associate Dean of the Law School at Boston University and teaches in our Higher Education Administration program, which sponsors these conversations. Jerry, welcome. Relax, and we'll have a nice conversation today, given all the things you're dealing with. But Jerry, just to kick it off, tell us about your background. I think what's fascinating to me, and I think to others as well, is how you've been able to merge two seemingly independent streams within your background, student affairs and the law. And somehow they seem to come together at some point. But can you give us some background on your journey through each and how they somehow someday converge?
Sure. No, Jay, I definitely have taken an unusual path to get to my current role as the Associate Dean for Student Affairs here at Boston University School of Law. You know, like many others, I was a resident assistant and an active student leader as an undergrad, but then went out to save the world. I started my career with a Better Chance Foundation, helping academically gifted students from high-risk areas that were unlikely to go to college get placed into private or accredited public high schools so that they could. I had a great experience, but realized, Jay, that K through 12, there were limitations on what we could do, and that my interests were really in higher education. Became a residence hall director with just a bachelor's degree, and you get to a point where you really need that degree to move further in the career. So got my master's at Canisius in college student personnel. It's not lost on me that the legal issues class there was required. Otherwise, I would not have taken it, just to give you context.
A life-changing thing for you, I assume.
Yeah. And but no one told me I would graduate from my master's, and within a year, I would go from an associate director role into the associate dean role for student affairs, where I would go from a programming counseling role into very much a compliance. I was the chief student judicial affairs officer for Drew University, a small liberal arts institution that still holds my heart out there in New Jersey.
I've been there. Great
I leaned heavily on the training I received in my legal issues class. I went back to the book, I went back to the concept, and used those tools to really help me build that bridge and self-direct myself in my new role. And from there, I really started to realize, you know, I became an associate dean. I was that for 5 years, that we really needed more of a bridge because there's so much good things happening on campus. And I think there's a lot of well-meaning legislators who don't understand sometimes what they're proposing, how it will actually be implemented on campus. And is there someone who can translate that?
Right.
Also, I saw plenty of higher ed administrators who, due to wanting to do the right thing and then maybe not having a deep understanding of the law, we're just giving up and kind of saying whatever the lawyer says and not thinking about our mission and our purpose and the greater good for our students. And really we need someone who can do both those things, who can understand legal compliance and the why, who can also serve as an advocate for what it should be, and not just accepting the law for what it is, but saying, no, we are partners in this. The law is of the people and for the people and by the people. So we must engage as a people as well. And so that's where then I became a practicing attorney. I got to that place where it's like PhD or JD, and I was like, let's take the road less traveled, and started my studies. I applied to one law school because Bill Kaplan wrote the book in that legal issues class I took in my master's program, and he was a professor at Catholic University. No one told me, Jay, he would go on sabbatical my second year of law school to rewrite his higher education materials. So I ended up transferring to Georgetown, and I believe in serendipity, and that was really an outstanding experience of what it is to go to a place that is the right fit, that had people to inspire me to push harder, to explore different things. I was then in practice. I was an attorney representing schools against the Department of Education and in accreditation, federal financial aid or Title IV matters, as well as issues more specific, Title IX, the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, gainful employment, definition of a credit hour, all of those things tied into my work. And so, you know, there was a lot to love. But my mother liked to say that every time I'm about to become really successful, I decide to change my career.
Exactly. I really admire the courage that you've had in terms of giving up one thing and then moving into another. I mean, giving up an associate deanship at Drew and then going into law school on, I assume, a full-time basis,
Yeah.
and then joining a law firm and representing higher education. So your clients were all universities.
That's right. And so different schools would come in. Typically, they would bring in the law firm. I was with Cooley. When things were really serious, they had an accreditation review where things had gone wrong and they could lose access to federal financial aid for their students. You know, I had the pleasure of helping a number of schools learn from their mistakes, do better, create new systems to come in, or to advocate on maybe why the law was wrong. And maybe the law needed better clarification or was too vague, and be able to be a part of that. And then I was also challenged, you know, in terms of there were some institutions that very much said, it's not my fault, the law is written this way, and if it's legal for us to do this, we will, for the greatest gains to our either for-profit stockholders and investors, or other entities within the institution. And I think that's what led me ultimately, Jay, to define for myself success is advocating to remove the barriers that prevent students from having the best educational experience possible, and to engage. So now I'm at BU. I get to facilitate, you know, legal education for my students. I get the great honor of being able to teach in the higher education program. Every semester, it is so empowering to see how the students start from a place, explore, take ownership, and by the end are advocating for changes at their own institutions or within their own work. And that's what we like to see.
So maybe your course at Boston University will inspire the next Jerry to emerge, in the sense that, who knows?
I love it. We actually have a couple of graduates from the program who are now state regulators who are working with the Massachusetts Department of Elementary Education, Higher Education. And what I love is that they are translating things from our program and empowering them to be the decision makers now. That's exactly what we want to see, especially decision makers in the legal realm who truly understand the on-campus experience, or broader than the on-campus experience, the student experience and the administrative challenges that we face.
Well, so much of what you're saying relates to sort of the language and translating across different groups, being able to speak to legislators, being able to speak as a lawyer, being able to speak to lawyers, being able to understand how higher education works. There are sort of different cultures that have very, very severe barriers in some ways. And,
I absolutely agree.
Yeah, figuring out how to establish a common language so they can understand each other. Lawyers are not often good at being understood. They seem to have their own version of English sometimes.
I hear that in the first 2 weeks of my class, almost every year. What is this? Who writes this way?
Yeah, who possibly writes this way?
What I love is we do discussion board posts, you know, in the first several weeks. And to see people towards the end taking out the initiative where they're like, well, I'm going into the handbook and I saw their regs were written this way. I find that vague. Is this enforceable? And to see them taking that up, and then even going back to their own places and saying, you know, after being in class, we reworked some things, because ultimately the students we work with, Jay, I mean, I see such integrity and such a desire for people to, again, you know, break through things, move forward in a positive way that creates greater access and greater outcomes for, you know, the future of our generation, our education, our country. And I'm about it. How do we get them there? So if I can translate that from the legal side and merge those, that's what I get a lot of purpose from that.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of the students are apprehensive about taking a legal aspects type of course. They expect there to be a big, expensive textbook and something that's going to be dense and difficult and sort of outside their comfort zone entirely. So I'm sure you spend a lot of time toning it down, reassuring them, figuring out ways of appreciating it without feeling traumatized by it.
A little bit, though, to be honest, I take a little bit of a different tack, Jay. I take it, well, no, but my attitude is we can do hard things.
Yeah.
We need administrators and people going forward who will take ownership, who will challenge themselves, and who want to understand and go through. And what I find, and I'm sure you do as well, people rise to the challenge as set. There's definitely a few people that, you know, may have that uncertainty, especially so many of us, including myself, can, as my mother would say, should all over ourselves. I should do this, I should do this. And it's a form of perfectionism. And that's really difficult because you can't let the effort for the perfect prevent you from being really good. And so I will actually straightforwardly open up about how we all bring our different experiences to the law, and what is just
Yes.
can often be defined by a viewpoint. And
Yeah.
what does that mean then for our campuses when we have people coming in with a breadth of backgrounds and diverse perspectives to say, what is a fair educational environment? What is the ultimate goal? How are we working towards our mission when we work in these laws? When should we comply, and when should we be advocating for change?
Yeah.
And again, by opening it up and framing it in that discourse, and the need for, if we don't rise to the other challenge, then we will have to defer to those who do, really helps people to take ownership. And I really find a lot of inspiration, and I'm not subtle. I've hired from the program as well. So, there are people working on my team here at the law school who were former students in the legal issues class.
Yeah,
So the benefit is multifold.
Yeah, that's great. No, and I think the point you're making is that the law is dynamic. It's not a static thing that you simply have to adhere to. It represents our best effort, and it's always going to be lacking. It's always trying to anticipate the future with all the unintended consequences that are going to emerge. And so, the world changes, and the needs change, the realities change. And so how do we as professionals confront that?
That's exactly right. I mean, Jay, you just summed up the biggest challenges that we're facing right now as we see new technologies coming out with deep fakes, where I can redo this video so that you would hear my voice from your, space, and it would seem seamless. How do we adjust that? What is copyright? What is the ownership? What is defamation? What's false statement? Where are all those things, and how do we hold people accountable to that under our legal systems?
Yeah.
It's very complex work. And I'd say on campus, it really hits with free speech, where how do you foster discourse without fostering intimidation or harassment situations is really difficult. And I'm really proud of the work that's being done at BU around that, especially under, I'll say, Ken Elmore's leadership, though I know there's a number of people contributing.
Yeah, talk about free speech a little bit, because certainly that's something that tends to be, we tend to look for absolute answers in terms of who has the right to do what and say what, and how do we even judge those things? Do we always have to sue each other, go to court, or try to press charges against one another over these kinds of things? Are there ways of figuring out some balance between your right to speak and my right to be protected from your speech, perhaps? It just seems like it's an inevitably sensitive issue for us to be facing right now, and certainly we want to promote as much comfort with speech as possible, so that we as faculty, we as students, don't feel totally stifled and suppressed all the time because we're afraid of something bad happening as a consequence.
Yeah, no, it's an incredibly complex web of rights, of intentions and ideals that are a real struggle. So first, let me just say a personal pet peeve. Free speech in a legal context is really about the government taking actions to limit the ability of us as citizens to engage in discourse. Right. So as a private institution like BU, we really have to stand up and live to the policies and procedures and the things that we've put forward. I think BU has committed to creating a marketplace for the exchange of ideas. So even if my words are offensive or may even be shocking to other persons on the campus, BU, based on our policies, would advocate for me to be able to engage in that speech. Yeah. Where it gets really difficult, I think, is around one, understanding. There's a real mix of understanding in the popular ethos about what's free speech. The president coming forward and talking about how Twitter as a private company with a product upon which he chooses to use, engages in things that is a violation of his free speech. I'm like, read your contract, which many of us don't. I'm also guilty of, do you accept these conditions, which is actually a contract that we're agreeing to with that entity. More than once I've been like, sure, let's go. But know that in a legal context, we would have to honor that.
Well, and not only read the contract, read the Constitution as well.
Well, there's that.
There's that. Because freedom of speech is defined, as you say, as Congress shall not make any laws that prohibit my freedom of speech. Twitter is not necessarily under that rubric.
No, and it really also goes, though, there's very valid arguments being made about how by us as Americans representing or recognizing corporations as persons in an operation, what does that mean? What is the empowerment that we've given, and what does it mean that, you know, our president and public entities use these private resources to do communications, such as what we're seeing? And it's not just public relations from the White House anymore. It's much more. But then the other side for free speech, and I think what's most complex on campus, is what someone considers what is discourse and what is hate speech. You know, we had an incident earlier this year, not here at BU, but there was a student at another institution who brought in flyers to a queer theory class that were about, you know, how conversion therapy and trying to save those students. For the student, as I understood it, it was a third-party report, so please understand, you know, I'm limited in my intimate details of it. The student was sincere in believing that he was trying to save the souls of those students in the queer theory class. The students in the queer theory class took it as an assault and as a potential threat to their safety in being in class. And what does it mean that people knew they were gathering in this class? And unfortunately, with the violence that we are experiencing and the heightened gun violence that we've experienced over the last 10, 20 years, you start to understand how especially our traditional age students have a heightened worry about what is speech. Is that actually a warning? Is that a threat? Could it be tied to something more? You know, Jay, I think I shared with you that this March was the first March that we didn't have a school shooting in America since close to 2000. And the only reason really seemed to be that the schools were closed because of the progress of COVID-19. And you just hate to see that. I don't want to take us far from a field from what you were speaking on free speech, but if there was anything for this group to think about on it, would be first to understand what is the legal scope of free speech, what is our accountability for the speech that we have, and by ours I mean as an institution and the voice of the institution. When do we engage in statements to say we will not stand for certain things? When do we create a forum where we facilitate really difficult speech or confrontational speech, and when do we have an obligation to protect that which we would abhor? I often say I have responsibilities as Dean Muir that Jerry Muir would never stand up for, but as Dean Muir, I will definitely do, because it's for a greater good. I'm also old enough, Jay, to remember when it was obscene to talk about gay rights. Or, you know, the AIDS epidemic. And, you know, I was young, but I definitely lived in a period where they were like, the president wouldn't say, President Reagan would not say AIDS or gay. And to think that what would have happened if we said that discourse is obscene and thus we can't engage with it, where would we be now as a country and a community? So I am a believer that we must facilitate that which is difficult and complex, and which at one point we may consider possibly even obscene, but we have to do it in a way that still fosters the safety of the individuals engaged.
So freedom of speech then trumps the right of an individual to be protected from information or opinions that are threatening and scary perhaps to that person.
Or you want to give them notice, right? Because you'll have different rights. If I am in a free speech zone, let's say in front of Marsh Chapel, which is an open air access, if I'm hearing things I don't want to hear, I can exit here, 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 and here, right? Like I can choose to remove myself from that space. Well, the free speech concept might change a little bit more of if I'm coming into a class, what can I expect? The syllabus gives me expectations. The rules of the institution gives me some, you know, of what to expect. And then there's a reasonable scope beyond that. And then I think where it gets even more complex is where you have conflicts within a res hall room, right? Where you're being assigned a roommate who may or may not hold views that you espouse, but more than just having a difference of opinion, could hold views that you see as threatening or demeaning to your humanity. And those are the complex issues that we are going through now on campuses across the nation.
So when you teach, Jerry, are you looking at these as kind of I don't know, sort of third rail type of issues that you bring up in class and have students participate in addressing in some way, both maybe legally, politically, and ethically in some cases?
Yeah, so I structure the class to first look at basic skills. What is it as an American, as a citizen, and then as an administrator to be able to access and research the basics of law that affect my work? Because often as a newer professional, we'll be trained And our obligation is only to comply with the training we receive from our institution, right? Because we're not going through, but there'll become a point somewhere around the associate dean level that you have to self-train, or you become the person who has responsibility to train others on these topics. So we do a bit on research. We will read cases and statutes and going through. I want people to feel like the law is a tool for them to use. And when we go in and we're reviewing different areas of law, we'll use cases as a tool to say, okay, here's how we can know what the law is. Now let's ask, is this what the law should be, or how would I translate what the law is and apply it to different situations that apply out in my job or in my role of responsibilities or on my campus.
Right.
And for people to start to realize those things and translate them, that's when you start to see ownership and the development of implementation to the point of advocacy. I try to have a full circle experience in the class where, we start off by reading the Constitution and kind of a bigger concept. They go through some different broader concepts, contracts, tort, which is about negligence largely. And then we'll go into Title IX, statutory, the American Disabilities Act, apply it to different places. But it's a mixture of learning what the framework is, that we understand what the law asks of us, and then applying it to different matters. So there is a little bit of the political, social piece of it, but I try to do it from a place where there's a lot of freedom for them to interpret, because it will be different depending on the type of institution they're at or what they're going to bring in. And also to have us own what is the benefit and the burden of working from our own perspectives. I try to bring the best of myself to my work, as I know you do, Jay, and yet, there's some limitations to that. And I know, especially when we're going through things like equal protection, people are really questioning, what my single perspective as an instructor up front might provide or miss out in terms of the discussion. And it's up to us to create an environment where people can feel open. And I honestly believe there's been mixed results on that. Some people have felt very open and safe to be there, and others have not yet. So it's something I'm continuing to work on.
Yeah.
So
speak to that a little bit more. So you're finding in the classroom, some students are not as open to being open in a sense.
Yeah, I think there's still a real caution of, one, not wanting to hurt anyone.
Yeah.
Two, that perfectionism, what should I say, what's expected of me, and to make the classroom a place where ideally we would be exploring together, we'd be making mistakes together, but that we would rise in the process together. Because I really truly believe you will go much further as a group, right? Through building, I do a lot of where you have to get up and turn and talk, but turn to different people. Okay. Because my hope is, even though I average about 30 students per class, I want them to know each other, because this will be their network going forward. And by talking with different people in different ways in smaller groups, sometimes it's easier to put something forward than if it's something where you're like, I'm not sure how this will be received by others. And I don't want to harm anyone.
No, but do you bring in your law school training and the Socratic method in the sense of playing devil's advocate in some situations? If you find that there is a tendency towards trying to be politically correct or constrained, trying to bring up the alternative points of view?
I will. Usually we build up to that, in the class. So each year I've kept in a case that involves a young Christian woman who is in a counseling program and asked not to counsel a same-sex couple in marriage counseling. She is like, I will counsel, anyone who is homosexual. I have no problem with that, but just not in this context, because she saw it as really directly adverse to her religious beliefs. And so you have a question here. If someone's saying, here's my free exercise rights, of religion, First Amendment right, the clients coming to a public school were like, hey, we're in a same-sex marriage and this is legal, and we have a right to equal access to these counseling things and not to be discriminated against based on the fact that we're in a same-sex marriage. And then you have the school's right of freedom of speech around the design of their curriculum and what they require. And then how would you work that out? Because the other piece I think we all need to own is that we will be the people making these decisions, right? We need to take the law and the standards, but ultimately take responsibility. Because when you say Boston University, in my mind, I often hear, Jay, Raul, Jerry, that the people who make up the place, because that's it. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. to shift a little bit, Jerry, speak to your role in the law school, because in some ways you have a wonderful opportunity to both be among law students and law professors and in a legal environment, which is part of your heritage, but also, in fact, to be in student affairs. So you have in some ways a decentralized student affairs job. You're dean of students in a sense for a school, which is a very unique role, I think. And I'm not sure how many different types of professional schools within universities provide that. Certainly medical schools do, law schools do, but I'm not sure who else does. But talk about how you in a sense become a dean of students within a college, within a university.
Sure. So definitely for an undergraduate population, I think that there's highly valued to have the degrees, to have an understanding of student development theory and operations, fiscal management of universities as an operation, and the larger context of what we provide through our programs, but then also experience. And so often dean of students will come up through a student activities, orientation, or especially residence life background if you're at a traditional residential campus.
Right.
If you are a dean of students at a distance education or for-profit entity, it might be more corporate with some counseling, social work background. Those type of skills are highly translatable. If you're at a community college as well, we might see a lot more because it's going to be about meeting the needs of students to, again, identify, remove barriers so that they can have the most robust educational experience possible.
Right.
I do think we are seeing more and more dean of students positions because students have a lot of choice, and we need to have people who are able to help them be responsive to needs and tailor responses to the resources to different things. And so you will see a lot more here at BU. I think every independent college has its own dean of students. The dental school, the Questrom business, the medical school, as you said, as well as here.
Yep.
For a law school, to become a dean of students at a law school, I think having a previous background in higher education is key, or having some sort of translatable skills around services to students and program development. There are definitely professional identity pieces. I was sharing with you changes in the bar exam that are happening related to COVID-19. Having a background in the law and understanding how to read the law and how those orders are implemented and changed is really helpful. But I often find it's nothing that we can't learn. But the most valuable thing that I take coming in from my past work in higher education is an understanding of student needs, an understanding of industry-wide resources, best practices, how to use my network, and then also looking to constantly improve in the profession. Jay, since I started, there are so many things that have changed. If I were to think about what's my next area for personal development, I'm really looking at data and algorithms, because my students have an expectation of delivery of services that are targeted to their individual interests and needs. And so for us to tailor that, I think that is the next direction that the law school is going to have to go. So yeah, there's a lot of time with me in my free time, kind of playing around, reading stuff, trying to learn and constantly grow.
Do you think of yourself as more a lawyer or more of a student affairs official, executive in a sense? Because in some ways you probably draw more on your student affairs background in your current job than perhaps your legal background. But I think for the sake of credibility and understanding the language, understanding the motivation and the context and the environment, your legal background is critically important. But on the other hand, you really are, in some ways, a dean of students.
That's exactly right. And if I were to break it out as you were putting forward the question, part of me is like, is it 2/3, 1/3, or
yeah, exactly.
3/4 student affairs and I think
on an average day, I guess.
Yeah, I would say 3/4 student affairs, 1/4 legal at this point. But some of that is unique to BU, in that we're very leanly staffed in the School of Law. And so I'm lucky enough to still have a lot of direct student contact in my work. And it's by necessity based on the staffing that we have here. But we also benefit. I always joke that I wanted to be a part of a small school in a large university, to have the resources of a large university and the intimacy and knowledge of peers and students of a small school. And I feel like I finally got there. That said, with changes that are coming, our compliance around distance education, what does it mean that we're doing learn from everywhere? and how are we ensuring compliance with federal financial aid obligations, distance education.
And the American Bar Association.
Absolutely. That's where having a comfortable background in that has been really helpful for me, and I use it frequently.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because law schools have gone through lots of changes the last few years. At one time, not too far, not too distant, law schools were considered a cash cow within the university, along with the business school, which also had some challenges as well. But the legal profession has, I'm sure, been incredibly disrupted. Legal education has changed quite a bit, and of course, schools are now competing with each other at a much more severe rate probably than they ever did. And so you're probably seeing all that, and that folds into to student expectations and what what kind of services you provide, how you provide really competitive advantage to Boston University. Why come to BU when it's, there's frankly an abundance of law schools now?
No, that's really it. That's where I'm grateful to be at BU. I knew after being in practice, I came here and my first faculty meeting, Jay, was a discussion of how do we do better by our students and our advising.
Yes.
And I'm like, I am in the right place.
Exactly. Yeah.
One of the things I love about BU is that it is ever growing. In the 5 years I've been here, there have been whole new institutions. There's a real hunger to always be improving, always being innovating,
Yeah.
trying to bring forth new conversations and have hard conversations in a straightforward way. And I just respect it. I think there's a reason why the discussion around concussions and the impact has come from BU, why AOC is our graduate, why you see different things of that, because I think BU really is seeking to empower and to engage on an international level. And I'm proud to be a part of that. I'm not someone who likes to rest on a laurel,
No. I think you're on a roller coaster right now, probably, and we'll see where it all ends up. But we could talk about that. What do you see happening in the fall? I'll be vague in general, and you can free associate any way you want to that.
So we're trying to get some of the framework around the hybrid model, right? One would be addressing what is it going to entail. I'm most familiar with this through past conference work, Jay, where a person would have, if you're remote, the Zoom experience would be on your computer, and on a second device, you'd be taking notes, whether it's a notebook or otherwise for the classroom experience, even co-curricular. And so in some ways, that could very much go forward. And then it's about, I have a background in television production from my undergrad days.
Okay.
What are the markers in the classroom? Where can I stand? What's my construct? So that I'm not only addressing the classroom, for lack of a better term, audience, but also am present with the broadcast audience as well. And so we're going to be structuring in that way. I am really inspired. I think the Center for Teaching and Learning is really engaged in moving things along. Where I'm worried a little bit about it is on the residential experience that our students value so much. It is about that time with faculty, right? That time together to really talk through what did it mean to sit down and talk about the Dred Scott case, right? Which was in our history a real blight where we legalized slavery, and to have people come out and talk about that time in our history and what it means and how its roots are still present. And now we're going to have to tell people, well, you have to do that with social distancing, or you have to do that in different realms. And that is a real loss that we're still trying to translate. We have several affinity building events that are like favorites even for me. And I'm wondering, what do we do if we don't have a cruise 2 weeks in, which normally really breaks the ice for students and brings them together? How are we going to
have a virtual cruise?
Yeah. But I believe I'm confident in the delivery of like high-end education. I am more still developing around the ideas of that interpersonal community that we really are fortunate to have here, and how to rebuild that.
Yeah. And on your Dred Scott point, obviously this is a very sensitive time for race relations, and probably that's going to be top of mind for students and faculty going forward. And how does my future as a lawyer, relate to providing fairness, opportunity, justice to others in society? Will that be compromised in any way by a hybrid model, by somehow students and faculty not being able to be with one another physically together, or really from your point of view as the as the associate dean, how are you going to make sure that discussion doesn't get stifled?
Yeah, no, for us, we're focusing on pro bono opportunities.
Yeah.
The economic downfall that's happened alongside with COVID has created huge opportunities for people to engage in various forms of legal intervention that can be really meaningful for a person. So are you interested in real estate law? We can work with tenants, we can work with housing, we can be teaching people their rights, we could be doing constitutional law. So we're actually building out a series of pro bono opportunities for people to say, what do I care about? What goes to my personal interest, but also where is a need in the community? And it's my hope, Jay, that you're going to see more BU law students out there engaging and contributing. Though, you know, we have a tradition, for example, every fall since I've been here, we've had over 100 students participate in Citizenship Day because BU Law has a very strong immigration training and practice area here.
Yeah.
And that's powerful because they help over 1,000 people complete the naturalization application, or at least move forward in the application process.
Right.
And this year we found out from our partner that they may not be able to have that day by just the nature, right, of 1,000 people coming to an area together to work through. And so we are working through, and we will be finding other pieces. I'm just wondering, as we go to these smaller cohorts, is that a new opportunity for different connections, or is it going to be a lesser substitute for the large group things we had before? And we're still working on that. And to address that, we're conferring with students, we're conferring with our stakeholders and other partners. We're trying to strategize openly. We're looking what's there beyond Zoom for us to consider. And then honestly, really watching as we begin to open up the state to say, what's possible?
Yeah.
Where can we go?
Yeah.
And, you know, we have to honor the fact that even in this time, there's so many people who need to engage, that you saw the level of engagement around the protests that we've seen in the last few weeks, the calls in, and there's so many different ways in which we can contribute. I just want people to find connection in the interim as well.
Yeah, and I would guess, Jerry, as into this decentralized model of your being in the equivalent of the dean of students within an individual school, you probably get to know the students a lot better than you would if you were a vice president for student affairs at a major university, which I hope you become someday. But the danger of that is remoteness. I think you probably have a lot more student interaction where you are now. Is that the case?
You know what? I actually structure things for that. So I work with a wonderful colleague who is our advisor to our Student Government Association, and I realized, you know, with her in place, don't mess with what's not broken. But I needed direct unfiltered student voices. So I have an advisory board. I have students from every year of the JD program who come in. We have blunt, straightforward conversations. Their feedback is invaluable to me and there's also a representative of our SGA on there. There's a representative from some of our affinity groups, because we purposely tried to put that group together to represent and bring voice to those who might be underrepresented in other areas. And so, yeah, I demand, and I think every student affairs official should make sure that there is some way in which they are still in touch with students. I also get a lot of value in teaching the students at Wheelock and translating it to the experience of my students here in the law school, because I see practices and patterns there that I think would really benefit the law environment. But sometimes because of the legal side and the professional identity, people might hesitate to engage, but we'll get there. So I definitely value having more student contact. I think that's the purpose upon which, you know, we do the work. And so I've been very happy with the unusual path, but the path I've taken.
It's an unusual path. I admire the fact that all the loose ends seem to come together in a very a miraculous way. And it's nice how you're able to do both your work in the law school and for Wheelock College, which also seems very symbiotic. I'm sure the students in Wheelock appreciate hearing about your journey, your experiences, an average day in the life of Jerry, and the examples and the issues you bring up, as well as some of the major controversies we have to deal with. And I'm sure you don't frighten them away from administration or the law. You probably bring them a little bit closer to it as a result.
That's my hope, Jay, right? We want to have them empowered and really feeling that they're ready to take the mantle as you and I kind of progress beyond what is that old adage? Don't trust anyone over 30.
Right.
Yeah, I'm definitely there. So
and the other adage is, may you live in interesting times, and we certainly live in very interesting times. And I think I like to point out that as unsettling and particularly scary as it might be, this is an extraordinary time to be an administrator in higher education. You're not simply replicating tomorrow what you did yesterday. It's just not going to work.
That's right. We're actually meeting my team this week and going all the way back to our mission. And effectively, the law school went through a rebuilding 5 years ago where they redid the whole tower. And we are doing that again, but mentally to say, what is a hybrid? What is the possibilities? What are the opportunities here?
Yes.
What are things like that? And it's really rocking us to our foundation
Yeah.
to say what matters, what doesn't. Because we know, there's certain things we're going to have to let go of as we prepare to create space for the hybrid model.
Right.
And from this, I think there might be new opportunities. It really goes to, we can go through all the training, all the reading as possible, but you can't underestimate attitude and as well as aptitude, right? And so do you see this as an opportunity? Do you see this as, another barrier? I'll be honest, Jay, there's days where I see more barrier than opportunity. But generally, I really think this is an opportunity for education to reassess.
Yeah, it's going to have to. It has no choice. And as you say, I mean, and we have a deadline. We have students coming, terms to begin, courses that have to start, and all that has to be done in a way that represents some new realities. And
Right.
it's going to force innovation, as which is sometimes necessary.
That's right. It may not feel comfortable, but isn't that the ultimate good, though? Right? They call them growing pains for a reason.
Yes. Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, Jerry, I really appreciate your time. I know you're having a very busy month, and I appreciate everything that's going on in your life. And thank you so much for the contributions you make to VU and to our program as well.
It's my pleasure, Jay. Truly, I wish you all the best, and I hope the series continues to go so well.
Good. Thanks very much, Jerry. Take care of yourself.
Bye now.